So let's conclude this chapter by looking at what these various SSPs actually correspond to. So where you have low challenges for mitigation and adaptation, you expect sustainable development in this phase space. Obviously, this doesn't explicitly say here in terms of the challenges of mitigation and adaptation in terms of the investments needed and the technologies needed. Okay, do we have, for example, to get here in terms of mitigation, do we have the scalable carbon capture and sequestration methods? And how long is it before we can actually begin to draw down CO2 from the atmosphere at a large enough scale and safely put it away somewhere for a long time? That's not very easy to account for in this depiction. Nonetheless, in this case here, adaptation challenges are low, but you are driving on fossil fueled development, so mitigation challenge in terms of the amount of CO2 you have to put away to stay on target for something like RCP 2.6 is going to be really great. Very high mitigation challenges. Okay, in the middle of the road you have optimized mitigation challenges and adaptation challenges. So in this case you are going to be dominated by things like regional rivalry for high challenges on mitigation and high challenges on adaptation. Okay, so this is where human agency and geopolitics and economic development aspirations and choices become very critical, right? Because if let's say in Montreal Protocol, most of the cost for replacing CFCs with HFCs was provided by US, Europe and Japan. Other countries benefited because these three countries and continents or unions decided that it was worth their investment to protect themselves because they are light-skinned. Ozone hole is much worse for them than a dark-skinned person like me. Okay, but regional rivalries also can mean the choices that conflict on exploiting common global commons like the atmosphere. How do you put value on life there? Which country's life is more valued, etc. So all kinds of rivalries can be imagined there. And if you focus on high adaptation but low mitigation, then it will result potentially in inequalities on the outcomes, let's say on health. This could mean very high air pollution because you're not mitigating much, or it could also mean very high extreme events. Like India can get hammered so badly with rain that rainy season crop damage is going to basically make agriculture impossible. Then they also lose on the global grain market and food market, for example, in addition to all the vulnerabilities to natural hazards. Okay, so obviously many more concepts have to be considered in this context. All global warming is local, so nobody obviously lives in global mean target. 2 degrees C is great, but it doesn't say very much about what it actually means in terms of extreme events like heat waves and floods and droughts at a local scale or a regional scale. A 2 degrees C warming target at the global scale, what does it mean for India, for example, or African countries, or for Bangladesh? We don't know, right? Not very easy. So global governance issues like CO2 levels, mitigation, obviously have to be done under frameworks like Paris Agreement, but local adaptation will be needed. I have a nice chapter in the course on bending the curve. The last chapter is on local solutions. You can look that up, but that's what becomes very critical. But also incentivizing developing countries and poor countries to be part of the global solution then also becomes very critical. So there are tools being developed like green funds and so on, which are not functioning completely yet, but obviously they will have to play a bigger and bigger role. World Bank, for example, has loaned for green infrastructures and so on. Not everybody agrees with World Bank as being a good Samaritan or a fair player, but nonetheless, they are leading climate assessments and funding of mitigation and adaptation projects. And many countries do rely on World Bank funding for their projects, right? So this chapter is essentially trying to give you a sense of the issues we face in global change science for application to mainly mitigation and adaptation, in terms of not doing just social science in a siloed way, in terms of impacts and outcomes, disparities, climate justice, etc., or just the physical aspects in terms of extreme events, CO2 increases, sea level rise, glacier melt, etc., crop yields, but also how the two have to work together for future navigation of the Earth system. So what are the sustainable pathways when you include human agency and human well-being in the natural Earth system, how the feedbacks are modulated, and how the outcomes are determined by the human aspirations and choices. Right? That's the challenge. So we will develop other chapters to look at these details of how global warming is actually working and how it has worked in the past, and what the options are, challenges are for mitigation and adaptation. Should be fun.